Thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks to Derek Hagan for being our guest presenter today as we discuss motivational interviewing in financial planning. Motivational interviewing, or MI, is a communication style that helps strengthen clients' motivation for and commitment to change. Their motivation is already there, and MI is a way of helping them uncover it. It helps explore your client's own reasons for change in a collaborative way that puts their interests first. In this presentation, you will learn what MI is and how to use it in your financial planning practice. MI is composed of 4 stages: engaging, focusing, evoking, and planning, which integrate nicely into your work with clients. You'll learn more about the skills used in motivational interviewing that will help you become a better listener, both in your practice and in your life. These skills include asking open-ended questions and prompts, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. Your clients are already motivated, and MI helps your clients identify and strengthen that motivation. And with that, we turn it over to Derek. Derek?
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good to be here. And this is a smaller group than last time. So what I want to do is try to get through, many of you look like you were here last time. So you're familiar with my drawings. I'll still go through all the drawings, but I want to spend some time at the end, 15 minutes or so, and I'll stay as long as needed as well to just have a conversation about this stuff. So motivational interviewing. Many of you are familiar. I'm pretty sure they talk about this in Fundamentals and Beyond with Money Quotient. So a lot of this will be familiar to you. Motivation is in the name. So it's interesting to talk about what is motivation. If you were with me last time, you remember that motivation can be viewed through several different lenses. One is where it comes from. So if it comes from outside of us, we're going to call that extrinsic motivation. And this is kind of like what it is when we give people advice, when we tell them what to do. We're motivating them from the outside. We're the ones that are telling them what to do. So extrinsic motivation is when I'm motivated from somebody else. If I'm motivated extrinsically, that can work, but anything will stop me. So external, this motivation is coming from outside of me. The flip side is intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is internal. So this is coming from inside of me. So intrinsic motivation is when I'm fired up to do something. I actually want to do this. I would do this thing if I couldn't tell you that I was going to do this thing, whatever I'm motivated for. So when I'm motivated intrinsically, nothing will stop me. So first lens of motivation is, where does it come from? Does it come inside of me, or does it come from outside of me? Second lens of motivational interviewing is, what am I after? So we can talk about a go motivation or an approach motivator. This is when I'm actively trying to get something. I want something. I'm chasing something. There's a particular outcome that I want. So this is either a go motivation or an approach motivation. And so it's something that I'm looking to obtain, something that I actually want. And I don't know what your experience is. My experience in the financial therapy world is that people have a hard time articulating what they actually want. They know a lot about what they don't want, which is a no motivator or an avoidance motivator. And a no motivator is something that I don't want. I'm actively trying to get away from something. And I had an old boss. He didn't use these terms. He didn't know about motivation. But when we lost an employee, he always wanted to know, are you running towards something, or are you running away from something? In other words, are you going to get a new, better opportunity, or are you trying to get away from this job? So in his own way, he kind of used these go and no motivations. So now we've got 4 different lenses. We've got, is it coming from inside of me or outside of me? Am I chasing something or running away from something? So you can almost imagine a 4x4 grid of this kind of motivation. So that is, motivation is kind of why we do something. Why are we going to do something? What's the motivation behind it? If we add into this self-determination theory, this is a theory that many of you are familiar with. It's basically a theory of psychological well-being. And if you followed me at all, I like to put things in ABCs. So my version of self-determination theory is the components necessary for psychological well-being are autonomy. That is to say, we need to make our own choices. We need to feel like we are in control of our destiny, that we're not being controlled by somebody. We're not a puppet. So autonomy says, I'm free to make my own choices. B is for belonging or connection, connectedness. This is to say that we are social creatures, and we need to know where we belong. We need to belong to a tribe. We need to know where we fit in that tribe. We need to have interpersonal relationships within that tribe. And C is for competency, mastery. We need to be good at something. So these are the three components that you've seen before. Self-determination theory. For this, I want to focus on autonomy, because I chose self-determination theory, but whichever theory of well-being you use, autonomy is in there. Autonomy runs through, I want to say all, but I don't have the data to back that up. So I'll say nearly all theories have autonomy at their core. So now what happens if we take this autonomy stuff and we map it onto motivation? We can separate this extrinsic and intrinsic motivation even further. So on one end of the spectrum, you've got your full extrinsic motivation, something we'll call external motivation. And this is when I do something literally because somebody else told me to do it. I would not do this if you didn't exist. I don't want to do this thing. I'm only doing this because you're there and you told me to do it. Okay, then a little further down the spectrum, we've got something called introjected motivation. You don't have to care what these terms are called. This is just to show you the spectrum. And this is a little bit less extrinsic because nobody's telling me to do anything, but it's still extrinsic motivation because I'm trying to get you to think something about me. So I'm doing this because I want you to know how smart I am, or I want you to know how responsible I am, or I want you to know how funny I am. I'm doing this because I'm trying to impress you or somehow get you to think something about me. So still extrinsic because I wouldn't do it if you didn't exist or if you weren't there, but it's less extrinsic because you didn't actually tell me to do it. Now we can further go down the spectrum when we talk about identified motivation, and you can think about your identity. If you're identified with something, then you want to act like that person. This is Seth Godin when he says people like us do things like this. Well, people like us is the identification piece, and the do things like this is the behavior action. So when I'm motivated with as my identity, this is like I'm a responsible person and this is what responsible people do. Or I'm a mindful person and this is what mindful people do. I'm a funny person and this is what funny people do. So whatever your identity is, you're doing it because of that. So other people aren't influencing you here necessarily. It's not fully intrinsic because there might be some things you don't really like doing. I don't really like filling out these reports, but I'm a responsible person and responsible people get their reports filled out on time. Then you've got all the way fully intrinsic motivation, which is I'm doing this because it's fun. I'm doing this. If I was on a desert island, I would do this if I couldn't tell anybody I was doing it. So what we've got here is a spectrum. And just to point out real quick, these little cartoons that I drew, like the one on the left say, do this. The other person says, okay. I labeled that as external because there's an implicit assumption that the person on the right doesn't want to do this. That same cartoon could be identified if that person on the right said, I'm a responsible person and responsible people follow orders. It could be intrinsic if I'm a natural follower. I don't want to be a leader, but if I get behind a good leader, I'll follow that leader anywhere. So the same cartoon can apply to different categories here. The point is that am I doing it literally because the person told me, all the way to am I doing it because it's fun? As you move down that spectrum, you notice your level of autonomy increases as you move down this line. So intrinsic motivation is one of the core, foundational pieces of motivational interviewing, which is to say we're supporting client autonomy and we're helping them find intrinsic motivation. The more intrinsic that motivation is, the more autonomy there is. So there's something to say about this autonomy. We want to be free to make our own choices. But something interesting happens when we get more choices. This is Barry Schwartz, paradox of choice. Something happens as we get more choices, we increase our level of paralysis. So this is choice paralysis. This is too many choices. It freezes us. I remember the days when you could go to a physical video store where they had movies on the walls and you looked through and tried to find your movie. And there's maybe 8 comedies, but 4 of them were sold out. They didn't have the DVD or the tape. I'm old enough to be a VHS guy. They were gone. So you only had 4 choices and you made your best pick from those 4. Now I'm told It hasn't happened to me, so it kind of is puzzling. But I'm told people spend their whole night trying to figure out what to watch because there's just too many choices. So that's interesting. So we want to induce or help people find intrinsic motivation by increasing their autonomy. With autonomy comes the responsibility of making choices, and with choices comes paralysis. So another way to think about this is ambivalence. Ambivalence is multiple motivations. It's two or more things that I want at the same time. So ambivalence says I want A, and I also want B, or C or D. I'm using two for simplicity. Everything I'm talking about here can get even more complicated when you add 3 or 4 or 5 choices. So I want A and I want B, or I don't want A and I don't want B at the same time. Commonly, what we see in our world is make positive change, implement our advice, or not do anything. I want both of these at the same time. And it's just like with motivation, we can kind of move it through a prism. I like prisms, probably because I'm a fan of Pink Floyd. And Dark Side of the Moon has this prism on the cover. But let's shine the light of ambivalence through this prism and break it up. There's different ways that we can feel ambivalence. One we might call a go-go ambivalence or go-go motivation. This is double approach. This is your kid in the candy store ambivalence, which is to say, I only have enough money for one candy, but I want all the candy. Silly example, but this applies in the real world. In the textbooks, they talk about finding somebody to date. I might have 2 or more people that I kind of want to start dating, but I can only pick one. And as I get closer to one, the other one looks like the better choice. And as I get close to the other one, so it is still ambivalence. It is still an uncomfortable feeling because we don't want to make the wrong choice. You might still call this the best of all the ambivalences because it's a good choice no matter which option you go with. The opposite, your no motivation or double avoid ambivalence, is when I have to make a really bad choice. This is your Sophie's choice. And if you don't know Sophie's choice, look it up. It's kind of a scary situation. I'll just call it the rock and the hard place. This is when I have to make a decision. All the decisions are really bad, but I have to make one of these decisions. This is when my boss says, I need you to lie to the regulators or you're going to get fired. I don't want to lie, and I also don't want to get fired. Okay, so that's a double avoid or a no ambivalence. You can even go further. Sometimes this is when you see people making positive change, implementing our advice, quitting smoking, exercising more. I can either change or stay the same, but that change comes with both a go and a no component. It comes with both an approach and avoid component. So it's got pros and cons. If not for the cons, I would have done this already. So I can cut out pasta and carbs from my life, but then I don't get to eat carbs. It's not as easy as it seems because of those cons. So an approach avoid ambivalence is to say, I have to make a decision. That decision I'm thinking about making has both pros and cons to it. And then the grand poobah of ambivalence is a double go no or a double approach avoid. Again, I'm using 2, but this could be multiple choices. I have a decision to make. Every decision that I have an opportunity to make here has pros and cons. So now this really freezes me in my tracks. Do I want to move across the country to be closer to my grandkids? Or do I want to stay back because I just paid out my house and maybe I increase my travel budget to get out to see them and maybe fly them out to see me? Both choices or all the choices have positives and negatives. So this ambivalence is this feeling of being frozen. Motivational interviewing is about helping clients navigate their ambivalence. It's about accepting ambivalence as a natural part of change. So that's where motivational interviewing comes in. And I talk about the 4 S's of motivational interviewing. You're not going to see this anywhere. This is my attempt to make this up. So I hope the founders will be okay with the 4 S's of motivational interviewing. The 4 S's are the spirit of motivational interviewing. That is to say, why are you doing this? This needs to be in the client's best interest. There's the stages of motivational interviewing. And if you've heard, we talked about it earlier at the beginning here, you've got engaging, focusing, evoking, and planning. Those are the stages that we go through. There's the skills of motivational interviewing. If you've learned anything about motivational interviewing before, you've probably heard of the ORs, OARS, open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. Those are the skills that we practice. And here's where I'm taking some creative license here, the speech. This is the language of change. This is the words that clients use. So these are the lenses through which we're going to view motivational interviewing and how it can apply to us. Let's talk about the spirit first. The spirit matters. Are you doing this to get somebody to do what you want them to do? Or are you doing this because this is what's in the best interest of the person? And Viktor Frankl wrote The Man's Search for Meaning. That's what he's most well known for. He's written other books where he said, well, before I tell you what he said, I have to say that it's incredibly difficult for me to draw a stick figure of Viktor Frankl without it looking like Simon from Alvin and the Chipmunks. But that aside, Viktor Frankl says approaching human beings merely in terms of techniques necessarily implies manipulating them. So again, are we techniquing them? Are we doing this to get them to do what they want? If so, we're not in compliance with the spirit of motivational interviewing. If we're doing something for somebody so that the reciprocation factor will get them to do something for me, we're using all the techniques from influence to get something out of it, we're violating the spirit of motivational interviewing. But the spirit has 4 components: acceptance, which is to say, I'm accepting what the client brings to the table. This is the opposite of judging them. I'm accepting them who they are. They're the experts in themselves, and I'm accepting them as people. And then we've got empowerment, and empowerment is the opposite of a deficit focus or a medical model where, you know, you're broken and I'm going to fix you, or there's something wrong with you and I'm going to make you better. This is closer to positive psychology. This is a strength-based approach. This is, you've already got what you need, so let's find it. So empowerment. Compassion, this is the fiduciary standard. You're putting their best interest first. You want what's best for them. And then the 4th piece is partnership. And partnership is to say we are a team. This isn't the expert and then the passive participant. This is you two are in the same car. You're serving as a guide, but you are on the same team. So these 4 pieces here make up the spirit of motivational interviewing. And the spirit of MI needs to cut through, it needs to run through everything that you do. It needs to go through all the stages. So the stages, you might have heard of these. EFEP, I sometimes call it EFEP. So that just stands for engage, focus, evoke, and plan. This is different from the stages of change, which I'm sure you're familiar with: pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance, termination. The stages of change are a psychological process that people go through when it comes time to change. It's that they're going through that with themselves, in their mind. EFEP is where we are at together in the journey to implement a change plan. Just slightly different. The first one is engage, which is to set the stage. You're establishing the relationship, you're establishing rapport. And think of it like you're getting together and you're asking yourselves, should we go on this journey together? Am I the right person for you? Are you the right person for me? Is this a good fit? So you're establishing rapport, establishing the relationship, making sure that this is a good fit. And you're kind of also asking the question, where are we? Where are we? So if you're lost in the woods, the first thing you want to figure out is where you're at. So you're establishing their client's current reality, their point A. Where are you? Now that you know that we should go on this journey together, you know where you are. Now you get to focusing. And focusing is answering the question, where are we going? It's what problem are we trying to solve here? I'm going to say this a few times, but I'll say it now because it's on top of mind. Motivational interviewing was established in addiction treatment. So there was one focus: to get you off fentanyl, to get you off meth, to get you off whatever you're addicted to get you off the gambling. One focus, and it was brief. It was meant to be just a few sessions or even as little as one session. In our financial planning world, there are going to be multiple focuses. There's a focus with regard to their investment plan. There's a focus with regard to diversifying that concentrated position. There's a focus with regard to that insurance policy. So when I say focus, this is a particular focus of what one problem that we're trying to solve. So where are we going is point B. What's your vision? Where are we trying to get? Okay, so the focus is their values. It's what they want out of life. It's what they want for this particular problem that they came to you with. In motivational interviewing, once you have the focus, it's easy to overlook the focus stage. Once you have the focus, that defines what change is. This is going to be important as we go through this, because sometimes it's so easy and so simple that it's easy to dismiss. The focus is getting off of meth. So the change is to get off of meth. Okay, that's easy in the investing world or finance world. I'm spending too much. So the focus is to reduce my spending. So the change is to cut spending or save more or whatever it happens to be. Sometimes the change or the focus is a little more difficult. And sometimes we don't want to muddy the waters with our own opinion. So sometimes we want to remain neutral and help the client decide what the focus is. Should we have another kid? That's not for you to tell them. Of course you should have another kid. You're such great parents. This is an amazing thing. You have an opportunity to bring another beautiful child into this world. Or you're almost done. Why would you want to have another kid? You're so close to being empty nested. You don't want to insert any of that into there. Do I move across country to be closer to the grandkids? Do I stay back? You can help them work through what that focus should be. But whatever the focus happens to be, that's going to define what change is. So if our example of the grandkids, if they decide with your help that they do want to move across the country to be closer to the grandkids, that becomes change. And then staying home, staying back in their original house is what we'll call sustain. It's sustaining where they were. If they decide they're going to stay back, that becomes change talk. So that becomes important. I'll bring that up a few more times. Once we know what the focus is, now we can start to evoke. And this is evoking motivation. This is one of the foundational elements that motivational interviewing is known for. We're evoking what they call change talk, which we'll talk about later. We're evoking their motivation. So now I know we should go on this journey together. I know where we're going. I know what you want. And now I want you to tell me, why is that important to do? What motivates you to get there? Why would we go there? Okay, so we're piecing together, we're helping them uncover motivation for why we would want to make this change that they talked about as defined by the focus. Once there's sufficient motivation built in, we can then start planning. So the plan, this is probably the most simple to understand. It is, how do we get there? We know we should go on this journey. We know where we're going. We know why we're going there. Now, how do we get there? It's connecting A and B, which, by the way, is not always a straight line, as I drew here. It's sometimes wavy and all over the place. Even though planning, it's in most of our titles, there are a couple of things to keep in mind as we think about advice through a motivational interviewing lens. So am I compatible advice? And number one is permission. We're only giving advice with permission. There's no space for unsolicited advice in motivational interviewing. Unsolicited advice is the junk mail of life, as the old saying goes, and it violates autonomy. They didn't ask for your advice, you give it to them anyway. And it's often as simple as saying, I'd love to share with you some ideas I have about this retirement plan. Is that okay? The way you phrase it, they're almost always going to say yes. I've never heard somebody say no, but you're getting buy-in to, can I share with you some ideas of what other people have done? So you're getting permission. Sometimes that permission is baked in. If they ask you, what should I do? I have this decision to make. What should I do? The permission is baked into that question. But even if they ask, what should I do? It's still helpful to follow this elicit, provide, elicit model that motivational interviewing talks about. So elicit is either eliciting permission. Is it okay if I talk about this? Are you interested in hearing about that? Or you're eliciting what they know. Say you want to get them set up in a simple IRA. You might start with, what do you tell me what you know about retirement plans? And they'll say, I don't know, there's this thing at work, a 401B or something. I don't know. It's a bunch of letters and numbers. Well, have you heard of this individual retirement account, sometimes called an IRA? No, I really haven't. And then you can get them to Simple. And then you say, well, is it okay if I tell you a little bit about why I think this would be good for you? So you elicit either what they've tried, you elicit what they know, you elicit permission, then you give them the advice or the information, and then you're always going to end with elicit, which is something like, does that make sense? Is there any more information that I can give you? Of these options, which makes sense for you? What do you think you'll do? So you're bringing this back full circle. Now, as tempting as it is to view this as linear, we first engage, and then we focus, and then we evoke, and then we plan. Indeed, sometimes it might be like this. If you have hourly, service offering, or if you do pro bono work and you're only working with people for 30 minutes or 60 minutes, you come in, you establish the relationship. What's the problem you're trying to solve? What motivates you to do that? And then what do you think you'll do? So it could work like this, but often it's more like dancing, moving in and up of the stairs, up and down the stairs. So you might be evoking, then you might have to go back and refocus, or in the middle of planning, maybe something happened, you have to go re-engage. Even though it's not linear, it's still helpful to recognize it through this lens so that you know where you're at in the process with them, so that you know how to use the skills of motivational interviewing. The skills of motivational interviewing are it's listening, it's reflective listening. I call it sometimes strategic reflective listening or applied reflective listening. We're going to use those skills a little differently at each of those stages of change. Let's remind ourselves the mechanics of listening. Your clients mean something. They've got a 50,000 thoughts a day. I've heard as high as 70,000 thoughts a day, unarticulated. You ask them a question, they're going to try to answer. So they're going to say something. They're going to give you some words. Once they say those words, you have to hear the words and pick up on other nonverbal cues. And then you have to decode it and make an interpretation of what you think they meant. Because there's a lot of links in this chain. And the founder, or co-founder, I guess, William Miller, founder of MI, says it's not a good idea to respond to what you think the words you believe you heard meant. So it's a mouthful on purpose, because what can go wrong? What they say might not be what they meant, and what you heard might not have been what they say, and what you think it means could be completely off. And so that's where these oars skills come into play. Oars like a paddle, a canoe paddle, and motivational interviewing, by the way, loves acronyms. So they're always putting things into acronyms. ORS stands for open-ended prompts or open-ended questions. We'll talk about the difference here in a second. Affirmations, which is affirming something positive about the client. Reflections is the core of reflective listening, and summaries are a collection of reflections. So applied reflective listening, this is my definition. I don't know if you'll see that anywhere. Reflective listening is closing this loop. And it's basically to say, here's what I thought you meant. Am I in the right ballpark? You usually don't say it that way, but that's at the point. You're trying to check in and complete this circle. And that's what our ORS skills are helping to do. The open-ended prompts and the questions get things kicked off. That gets the process moving. And then when it comes to completing the circle, that's where the reflections, the summaries, and the affirmations come into play. And then with a good reflection, that starts the cycle again. You can really get clients talking with good reflections and summaries. So let's first talk about open-ended prompts. Or first, let's talk about questions and closed-ended questions. A closed-ended question is the opposite of an open-ended question, and it limits what the speaker can say. It's a number, or it's a no or a yes. It's what age do you want to retire at? 62. Okay, conversation over. Are you satisfied with your insurance agent? No. Okay, well, that's it. Nothing else you can say. An open-ended question invites them to start talking. So you don't say, what age do you want to retire? You say, what does your ideal retirement look like? So now you've asked them to paint a picture of what this looks like. So an open-ended question, the speaker might be surprised by what comes up. If it's a good open-ended question, they've never thought about this before, and they give it a shot. So open-ended questions expand what might be said. Closed-ended question constricts what might be said. Not to say that you never use closed-ended questions. Sometimes you want to end a conversation. Maybe emotions are getting too high, so we want to rein back what they're saying. Now, questions over prompts. Why do I say prompts instead of questions? This comes from my mentor, Ted Klontz, who, this is my words, not his. He's on his soapbox and trying to rid the world of question marks. So his point is that a question has an answer, and an answer is either a right answer or a wrong answer. So when you're asking questions, it takes us back to school where we think we're going to be judged for what our answer is. His whole point is it's simple. You just get rid of the question marks. What does your ideal retirement look like? Turns into, tell me about your ideal retirement. Or, I'm curious to hear about your ideal retirement. Or, I'd love to hear what retirement means to you. Share with me. Paint me a picture of. So you're still kind of talking about the same thing. You're just getting rid of the question mark. And he proposes that makes it more welcoming and easier to talk. So that's how you get things started. You're trying to help people. You're opening up the space for them to share with you. And once they share, I'm going to go to the R first, because this is the core of reflective listening. Now you're checking in for understanding, and you're reflecting what you've heard. And I like to think of reflections as an iceberg. And the tip of the iceberg, what's above the waterline, represents the words that they said. So a simple reflection doesn't stray very far from what was said. And this is a great way to check for understanding, to make sure that you hear them, to make sure that you're on the same page. You're going to use a simple reflection a lot in the engaged stage, but you're not straying very far. A complex reflection goes below the waterline, and you're reflecting back something that wasn't said. So you're reflecting back an emotion, or you're reflecting back where you thought they were going with that statement, or you're reflecting back both sides of their ambivalence. You're reflecting back a different perspective of what they said. So a complex reflection, you're reflecting back what wasn't said. Now, you're not making huge guesses. You're not taking like 6 steps and trying to figure out where this isn't chess. You're maybe going 1 or 2 moves ahead to see where you're going. So simple reflections above the waterline, complex reflections below the waterline. And that's how you can help people feel understood. You can move the conversation forward. Affirmations are kind of a type of reflection where you're reflecting back something good about the client. You're affirming something good that they did. And they talk about simple and complex affirmations. I think they're kind of the same thing. A simple affirmation is affirming something that they did. A complex affirmation is affirming something about them. It's affirming who they are. They do a lot of good things. So this is to say we're not going to miss it. Remember, we're not deficit focused. We're strengths focused. So that when the client says, I know that you asked me to call my estate planning attorney, I didn't. All I got was like 4 names. I researched some names and I only found 4. Right? So affirming is to say, oh, good, you did some research and found out some people to call. What'd you learn about them? So it's not reflecting the what didn't you do, it's reflecting what you did do. And finally, summaries. These are a collection of reflections. These are when you're tying together everything that you've heard in a succinct little 3 to 4 sentence paragraph. Really good to use in transitional periods. So you've got multiple items on your agenda. You might say something like, before we move on to the next agenda item, I want to make sure I've understood what we've talked about so far. A, B, and C, and D. Would you add anything else? And yes or no. And if they say yes, then you listen to them. If they say no, then you now get to move on to the next agenda item. So these are the ORS skills that we're practicing. Reflections, the different types of reflections. We're practicing affirming what they're doing well versus shaming them for what they've done wrong. We're practicing our summarizing. We're asking open-ended questions and prompts. And we're using these a little bit different at each stage when we're listening for change talk. And this is where, I took the creative license here to call it speech. This is the language of change. And this is another thing that motivational interviewing is well known for. They call it change talk. We're listening for change talk, especially at the evoke stage where we're evoking their motivation. Because language matters. The words people use matter. If you say, Derek, I heard you got a big old truck and I'm moving on Friday. Can you come over and help me move? You're going to listen closely to how I answer that. If yeah, I'd enjoy doing that, or I probably could do that. I can do that. I wish I could do that. I'm willing to. I've already helped you before. No, don't count on me. I'll be there at 9. How I answer that gives you some information about my motivation and my intent. And that is, you've got that already. This is, you intuitively know that. If you ask for my help, how I answer, you're tuned into something about my motivation and intent to do it. That's all motivational interviewing is. It's taking that intuition that you have about the words that I used, and you're paying close attention to it. So remember, the focus stage defines what change is. And that change, when there's language, when there's speech in favor of that change, they call it change talk. We're training our ear to hear change talk. And just like when you asked me to move, my answer gave you some indication of my motivation and my intent. So too does change talk have two components: their motivational component and the intent component. In the literature, they call the motivation side, they call this preparatory change talk, as we're preparing to make a change. And the intention side, they call it mobilizing change talk, as in I'm getting ready to do something, planning on doing something, I did something. So change talk, just it's the prism again. We're taking change talk and we're splitting it up into preparatory and mobilizing, representing motivation and intent. And then we can split it even further. They love their acronyms, I'm telling you. So they talk about darn cats. When we start training our ear for change talk, there's different types of change talk we're going to hear. Darn on the left represents the motivational piece or the preparatory change talk. Cats on the right represents the mobilizing or the intention piece. So on the preparatory side, we're listening for desire language. What do they want? I want to do this. I'd like to do that. I wish I could do that. When you hear that, you make a note of it, because they're saying they want to change. Whatever the change was defined by the focus. If they say something about their desire to do it, that's desire language. Ability language, the A, is their confidence. Do they think they can do that? Yeah, I think, when I put my mind to it, I can do that. That's ability language. We want to make sure that we're taking note of that. Sometimes these are combined. It might say, if I wanted to, I could put my mind to it and make sure it gets done. And so I could do it is positive ability language. If I wanted to is pretty lackluster desire language. So sometimes they're combined in the same sentence. R stands for reasons, as in I've got reasons to make this change. So this often has an if-then characteristic to it. If I don't do this, then I'm in big trouble. If I do this, then I'll be healthier. So we're listening for any reasons that they have to make a change. And then the perceived need. Do I need to do this? This is their importance level. I don't have any other choice. I have to do this. So these are the 4 versions of preparatory change talk that we're listening for, and this builds motivation. And then we get close to action, and they talk about cats, although I actually like cats. So I swapped the A and the C. I call this darn acts. One, there's no darn cats. Cats are cute. Acts also is the order that we see it. So I think this makes a lot more sense. Activation language, this is, I'm willing to do something. Sure, I'd try that. I'd be willing to give that app a try. Yeah, I'll track that for a while. I think I could do that. So activation language is they're thinking about doing something. And so you're capturing that and reflecting that. Commitment language, now this is more like a promise. I'll have this to you by the time we meet next time. I'm going to do this over the weekend. Commitment language is saying that they're going to take some action. I'm going to call that estate planning attorney. So thinking about doing it, I will do it. And the TS stands for taking steps, which is to say I did it. Right? I did something. So we're paying attention to that kind of language as well. So when the example earlier, I didn't call the estate planning attorney, but I did do some research. We're reflecting the taking steps language of you did some research and found some names. That's the kind of categories, the full prism of change talk. And I have to talk about the flip side. The other side of change talk is called sustain talk. And that is, once the focus is defined and we know what change is, language in favor of change is change talk. Language in favor of not changing or staying the same is sustain talk. Sometimes I call it status quo talk. And it's kind of the same thing. It goes through the same darn cats, but now this is either desire to stay the same or no desire to change. And it's, I don't have the ability to change. I don't have any reasons to change, or I have reasons to stay the same. So it's the same thing, just the flip side. Think of it like multiplying by -1. It's just the opposite of change talk. And just to tie a bow on this, there's something called discord, which is also negative talk, but it's not about change. Discord is often about you and your relationship. You're only doing this for the money. You're not listening to me. You always take his side. That is, there, discord is something about the relationship. And when you hear discord, it's often a sign that you're too far along the stages. You might be in planning when you should be in evoking, or maybe you need to go back and re-engage. But when we listen for this change talk and sustain talk, when we train our ear for this, we can start to listen for what's the balance like. And if we have about equal change talk and sustain talk from the client, that's when they're ambivalent. I'm about equal. I kind of want to move across the country, and I also kind of want to stay here because I just paid off this house and I know all these neighbors. If it's about 50-50, they're ambivalent. And when you start to listen for and invite, so you're listening for the change talk and then you're inviting it. You don't just have to sit passively and wait for it. You can ask for change talk, often just by asking through the darn cats. Tell me some of the reasons you want to do this, or assume you were going to do this. Do you think you could? What are the best reasons to do this? So you can ask for change talk. You listen for the change talk, you reflect back the change talk. That gets them talking more about the change talk. And then pretty soon the scales tip. They're giving you mostly change talk. And now you can move on to the planning stage. Sometimes though, you'll hear mostly sustain talk, even though the focus that they decided was about change. They're not giving you a lot of change talk. But when you do hear it, maybe you hear 9 sustain talk statements to 1 change talk, you can focus in on that. And your goal here is to not get them all the way to change. Your goal here is to induce ambivalence. It's to get them to question staying the same. Just to introduce a little bit of, you told me you wanted to make this change. You told me a couple of reasons. Tell me more about that. And then you can create ambivalence. So that's mostly what I wanted to cover here. If you want to learn more about this, Bill Miller, the founder, took all of the listening bits from motivational interviewing and he took it out of MI and he created a book called Listening Well. This is just a 100-page book. Don't let that confuse you. There's not a wasted page, not a wasted word. This is all the listening stuff from motivational interviewing in one book. He did the same thing with ambivalence. So all the ambivalence stuff from motivational interviewing is in a book called On Second Thought. If you're a nerd, dweeb, dork, or other kind of Poindexter like myself, and you like reading textbooks, there is a 4th edition out. I've only read this one once so far. It's pretty good. There is some minor changes from the 3rd edition, but you'll still find the 3rd edition out there. I've read this one multiple times. Both of those textbooks will give you a really great, it'll take this a lot deeper. And Jim talked about this earlier, but we got a boot camp coming up in October. And it takes this kind of stuff. It goes a lot deeper, 8 weeks, 12 CE credits. It's going to be learning all these skills, learning how to use it, learning where you are at the stages, exercises. You're going to be watching it done in real time. You're not going to be participating. This isn't like a role-playing thing. There's going to be a part 2 that is about role-playing, but you don't have to do part 2. Although if you want part 2, this is a prerequisite for it. So I'll just leave it there and we can get into questions. I want to make sure that we got room to talk about, what do you want to hear? What would make this most interesting for you?
Yep, thanks, Derek. Nobody typed anything into the chat, so we can just make this an open forum if anybody wants to raise their hand or just unmute yourself and ask any questions you may have. We'll spend some time and get to the bottom of your questions.
So I'm just wondering, as far as the boot camp, and it sounds like a lot of the acronyms and things that you're using, they do use some of the language of life planning. The word evoke, I think of George and And so I wonder if some of this, the boot camp is going to have kind of like try to more or less, I don't, categories is not the word, but kind of, and certainly not pigeonhole, but try to help slot those into some of the money quotient tools so we kind of see where those are. Does that make sense?
I think it does. So let me answer what I think the question was, and then you tell me if I'm off base or not. So it's going to be lectures and exercises. So you're going to practice looking for this stuff. And then most of, if not all, most of the modules or the weeks will have kind of the MI/MQ compatibility. So how do these MI skills help you with the MQ process? And then vice versa. How do these MQ tools, what are the tools that you have available to you, and how do those fit well into this process?
Okay,
So we're
that's what
kind
I was
of,
thinking. The synthesis is kind of, that's
yeah,
what I was,
yeah, yeah,
okay, cool.
and going both ways.
Excellent. Thank you.
But I know I heard another voice, and there was another question in there somewhere before you started, or right as you were starting to speak, Tom.
That was just me. I was just going to ask for more information about the boot camp, but it sounds that kind of answered what I was wondering about myself.
Okay. And
Well, I can
Jim's in the
also-
process of sending out an email, so just be on the lookout. We're not going to leave you hanging. There'll be more information coming.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll include it in the follow-up to today's webinar. You may, if you're poking around the MQ websites today, you may see something briefly as we test it out, try to get all the formatting. It's not quite formally ready yet, but we'll let you know. But we are looking, just as a heads up, a mid-October start date. I believe the course will be 7 weeks long, roughly 7 weeks. And it is all self-paced. We certainly will have assignments that are due within a certain time frame, but there are no live lectures. There's nothing that would prevent you from doing this on the weekends or in the evenings or any time that's convenient to you. And if you have any questions about any of that, we certainly will be happy to help you out. We're buttoning up the final bits and pieces of that, though, and we'll get that info to all of you very, very soon.
Yeah, so now I'll just add that we are possibly planning on putting in 1 or 2 live Q&A sessions. So most of it is self-paced. The Q&A wouldn't necessarily have any CE, but it would be a chance for you to say, how do I use this, or this didn't make sense? Can you give me more information on that? This is the first iteration of this. So we're taking feedback and we're using that to, make it better, hopefully in the future.
Absolutely.
Well, one more question, Derek. What did you use to do your drawings or your slides? What like Prezi or something like that?
I just know it's just PowerPoint, but I stretch it to the limits of what it's meant to do.
Excellent. I love that.
Right. Any other questions, thoughts, anything else at the moment?
No, I just want to say, Derek, this was really good. It's a lot of information, but I thought it was really well presented and super helpful.
Good, thanks. And that's you nailed the head on how do you put this together? It's either I have to pick some of these things and leave some stuff out that felt a little incomplete, or it's paper thin and covering all of it. So I tried to at least cover the 4 S's, as I call it, and at least give you some information on what to look for when you go read those other books, or tune into this kind of stuff.
It's a boot camp teaser.
It kind of is, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it'll be it is a lot to digest, and I don't and I know you didn't present it as a way that it should be sufficient, but yeah, it certainly is just kind of scratches the surface of the more curiosity about it. So I'll look forward to seeing more about the course, the expanded course.
And we can also break this up into other webinars too. Like, so it's possible, and we would say probably even probable, that this is just too much information to my first run through months ago when I did a version of this. It was an hour and a half long, so I had to I had to prune it a little bit.
I had it as an hour and a half on my calendar. I think that's how it came
What is
out. It looks like we're wrapping up in an hour though. But will you be using those books in the that you mentioned, those two, Listening Well and On Second Thought, or what was the
Yeah,
third
I
one?
think so. Those are relatively inexpensive. So those, if there's required reading, it will be from there or PDFs of the textbook. I don't believe, I say this knowing that things could change, but I don't believe we're going to require you to buy a $95 textbook or whatever. If there's something that I want you to read or that we want you to read from the textbook, we'll find a PDF for that chapter or whatever. Sounds
We
good.
will see you all soon. Derek, thank you so much for your time. Until next time we talk to you, if you have any questions, give us an email and we'll see you all soon. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.